Hello everyone, Marcus here, and in this video, we're going to be doing a review of Log Horizon. I watched this show back in fall of 2013 when it was first aired on Crunchyroll.com. I wasn't a paying member at the time, so I was always roughly 1 week behind. However, I stayed and kept up with it throughout its entire run, and never really missed a beat, and managed to successfully watch all 25 episodes in one single weekly by weekly setting. Afterwards, I have rewatched the show roughly 2 times. Both of those times were done in a complete, from first episode to last episode fashion, as is compared to doing something more along cherry-picking episodes, like I might do with some other shows. The primary reason I decided to watch Log Horizon revolves around its basic plot summary. Effectively, players have suddenly woken up and are trapped inside of the world of an MMO they are all veterans of. That is more or less the plot synopsis, and quite frankly guys, I am a gamer, and I am an otaku. I love both anime and video games, so having both of those elements tied together into one anime is more than enough to get me interested in watching a show, or at the very least giving its first episode a good try. I should also note that this show has a similar premise to .hack Sign and Sword Art Online. I have watched both of these series, and was personally a very big fan of Sword Art Online. However, I can say that .hack is probably a show I would have preferred to not watch, simply due to how boring I personally felt that it was. Pardon if that opinion doesn't drive with some of you, but it is my opinion, and I just kind of found that .hack wasn't my cup of tea. All 3 of the shows bear in common that the game that they are trapped inside of is a massively multiplayer online role-playing game, or MMORPG for short. These are massive video games that have many players simultaneously experiencing the same world in an RPG style of gameplay, whereby it usually involves defeating or killing monsters in order to progress and obtain experience points, which allow you to become stronger inside of a game, and fight stronger monsters which can provide better loot, or in other words, materialistic virtual goods. Being that I am an avid gamer and anime fan, I am very familiar with almost all of the terminology that can come up in this show, which quite frankly is a lot. You'll usually hear things such as tanking, DPS, your healer, crowd control, and other such phrases being tossed around willy-nilly in the show. These can all be rather daunting for someone who isn't experienced with these topics. However, I am experienced with these topics since I personally am a gamer, and thus, I found that my experience with this show might be a little bit skewed a little bit in that direction towards being positive, simply because of the fact that I could actually keep up properly with every single thing that they're saying at any given moment in time. So, do note that if you aren't much of a gamer and are considering watching this show, if you don't know the terminology, you're going to want to pay very close attention to whatever explanations they give, because I actually do think that they take a good amount of time to explain some of those things, although I'll be getting into that a little bit later in this review. Log Horizon is written by the author Mamare Kono, who is the author as well of another series I enjoyed, Maoyu Mao Yusha, or roughly translates to The Demon King and the Hero. Effectively, both series have a very similar tone, and I found that when I finished watching Log Horizon, I actually went straight over to watch that series as well. I'll be covering the relevance of that little detail a little bit later in this review, but more or less just know that if you watched Maoyu Mao Yusha and enjoyed it, this series will probably be right up your alley. I want to take this moment to just reaffirm some of my personal biases in this regard. In some respects, somebody could consider Log Horizon a show about virtual reality. I personally think that its relationship to virtual reality is a bit more loose as is compared to Sword Art Online, or perhaps .hack. So I kind of still feel that it's relevant, though, for me to note that I am an avid fan and advocate of virtual reality and have a personal investment in its future success. So whenever I see a series about virtual reality, I feel that I am intrinsically biased towards enjoying that series a lot more than I would be if it weren't about virtual reality. So I feel that you should know about this. Another detail is, I have mentioned earlier, but I am an otaku. So in many respects, one could say that I can be a little bit more forgiving of some of Log Horizon's more anime-esque quirks as compared to someone who is more of a fan of Western animation. So I just want to let you guys know that I am probably a bit more skewed to forgive some of this show's more standard misgivings simply for the fact that it is anime, and then thus I'm capable of tolerating some of its weirder or less appealing factors to the broader audience. As a final note, everyone, I should probably note that Watashi wa sukoshi nihongo narimashita. I know a little bit of Japanese effectively. I can't really say that I'm completely fluent, but I am confident that if I were to be dropped into Japan with basically no one to guide me around, I might be able to talk my way out of a good bit of the situation and survive in that respect. So I can say that whenever I do watch anything that is Japanese, whether it be anime, a drama, a cartoon, or anything, I'll usually feel a little bit smug whenever I hear them say something in Japanese that I can actually pick up on when it's very simple. So I find that that's a little bit of an extra bit of joy I can get out of a show, as is compared to other people that might watch it. So I just wanted to let you guys know that so you can know a little bit of where I'm coming from in that respect. Well, everyone, that just about does it for my background with this anime. Log Horizon is an arc show that deals with the primary premise that the player base of a long-running fictional MMORPG called Elder Tales have all of a sudden awoken inside of the game and can't seem to figure out how to get out or how exactly they got in. This is an event they call the Apocalypse. And truly the only thing that they have to go on is that the Apocalypse sort of occurred at around the release of a new patch or expansion pack per se called the Novosphere Pioneers or the Nullsphere Pioneers, depending on where you're listening to. Sometimes they kind of alternate between it in the anime, the manga, although for the anime's sake and the way I watched it, it was Novosphere Pioneers. As I mentioned a bit earlier, the players don't really have any idea how they got into the predicament that they're in, and the truth of the matter is, a lot of the game's aspects still remain as a game. So players have HUDs, or in other words, heads-up displays, they have experience points, they can still defeat monsters, and most importantly of all, they can still respawn. Thus, the primary question that the player base is left to answer is quite simply, what do we do now? I might have mentioned this earlier in the background, but a lot of other shows have covered this kind of genre of being trapped inside of a video game rather frequently. It's so much so that it's kind of become a bit of a trope. And even before this anime came out, Sword Art Online came out the year previously and actually ran a little bit into the same year of 2013. So in many respects, one could say that Log Horizon's idea or premise isn't all that new. As I mentioned earlier, the premise of being trapped inside of an MMORPG or video game isn't exactly something new to Log Horizon. As a matter of fact, it'd been less than a year since Sword Art Online, another anime with a similar premise, had just ended. So, one could say that Log Horizon has a bit of an uphill battle since there are so many other series that cover a similar premise. However, I find that what is unique is Log Horizon's approach to the situation. You see, guys, the trapped in an MMO or trapped in a video game is a form of subgenre to the larger trapped in another world genre. You see, everyone, in shows that follow this genre, such as Now and Then, Here and There, Zero no Tsukaima, Cage of Eden, or Dog Days, usually the primary focus is to try to find a way to get out. However, with Log Horizon, they don't have any immediate idea as to how they got there at all. So effectively, they have no reason to believe they can get out. And truthfully, they're stuck in their favorite video game. Should they want to get out? The show thus makes it its purpose, really, to ask the question rather, how do we get out, into, what do we do now? Because they really have no reason to believe they can get out. So, are they going to spend their time just sitting around like blank slates? No. They've got to do something, right? To make matters a bit more complicated, unlike other shows, death is not a threat inside of Log Horizon. The players can die and will not suffer any significantly great penalties in terms of their continued existence. They'll simply respawn inside of another area, and although this plot kind of adds a small bit of a penalty, it's not so big of a penalty that dying is all of a sudden some major, oh my gosh, the world's gonna end, or I'm dead situation. That's effectively just, I'm gonna respawn and lose some items. It takes the concept of death from video game and imports it into the story instead of the concept of death that we have IRL, and that considerably changes the dynamics for life in this show. Effectively, every single one of the main characters that are players inside of our story are immortal beings. They can't die. So all of a sudden, the question they have to ask is, whether or not this situation of being trapped inside of their favorite video game without the ability to die is all it's hyped up to be. What do you do when you wake up and must live inside of an MMORPG? That is the question that this show seeks to answer inside of its format. I'm personally rather interested in the topic. However, I do have to say that this great premise is somewhat hindered by the way that it's presented within the show. I should note that I did mention the show is arced, taken in a very slow and steady fashion throughout the show, and really takes its time emerging from the overall stacking of different elements occurring within the show. Effectively, the show gets a lot more interesting as it goes on, adding layers and layers and layers and continually building upon what has been built on before. However, the show does suffer from the fact that it takes a very long time to build up, and thus, it takes a while before you can really say that it's taking advantage of the premise it's set about to do. And I find that this slow build-up is probably not going to be all that much fun for a lot of people. And I think that the main reason I managed to stick with it so well is because I personally have so many biases and predispositions towards shows of Log Horizon's nature. My RPG disposition made it easier for me to enjoy watching the battles, since I could understand the lingo and see the kind of tactics they were exploring, as well as seeing the awesome benefits and execution that it would take to actually do these feats. By extension, my anime disposition made it a little bit more tolerable for me to take on the arced approach that the show does take on for its form. As a result, I have to say that it takes a bit of work on my part in order to actually make the show itself work. So I find that I can't give very high or perfect marks on an objective level to such a show's premise when it does take so much effort for even me, someone with a bias towards the show, to really start to kick into it. To make matters worse, I actually find that the show's premise is a lot more fleshed out as the series goes on as is compared to the initial deliveries. So, the fact that I have to slog through the initial half and the kind of a slow, methodical presentation just to start really having a feel for the emergence of something greater in the show kind of disappoints me in many respects. And thus, I can't really say that I can give Log Horizon a very good read-off in hindsight due to this fact. Thus, I find myself awarding Log Horizon only 2 lit stars out of 5 possible lit stars. I'm a big fan of virtual reality, video games, and anime, so a show like this is definitely something I can say without question is right up my alley. However, looking back on it, I can definitely also say that it took a lot of work for somebody that is as predisposed as me to really get into this show as is compared to something else, like Sword Art Online, or Fate Zero, and other such works that are much better at getting their hook into you right from the start. The story primarily follows behind the actions and decisions of our main character, Shidoe, the Enchanter. We follow Shidoe around as he steadily tries to get a grasp on the situation, gather a small group of friends, and gather the social connections necessary in order to make an impact on the world presented for him. As unfortunately, guys, playing inside of a video game that you love 24/7 isn't all it's hyped up to be once you get down to the nitty-gritty. Players, being effectively immortal now, have nothing to motivate them to do anything. Even the cost of staying alive in the game is so low that players don't even really need to think about it. They could just kill a couple of goblins every day and be perfectly fine for basically life if they really wanted to. More of the higher level veteran players are probably so rich they don't even need to think about money for the rest of their existences. Although then again, since they're going to be immortal, I suppose they would have to think about it a little bit, but then again, it's not going to be that hard to get any, now is it? But then again, combat and questing, 2 of the main, if not the main, ways to entertain yourself in an MMO, have effectively been reduced and hampered thanks to the new perspective. Combat isn't as easy as it used to be, simply due to the fact that the new perspective makes things a lot more upfront and personal, and quite frankly, a lot of players are switching to more crafting style careers due to the fact that combat is a lot scarier now than it used to be. Add in that questing has been made slightly more complicated due to the new nature of the NPCs, which have seemingly become sentient and have their own lives, histories, and all other sorts of details, and effectively, the two mainstays of the MMORPG genre, questing and combat, have effectively been rendered worthless. The story goes about tackling each one of the issues I mentioned in a very slow and one-by-one fashion over the course of its arcs. Although some things are kind of covered in massive sweeps, at the same time we still do get a lot of time to go a little bit more personally into each one of the issues, which I find is a very nice thing that they take their time to do. Another thing that they take their time to do is to explain things, and make it easier for us, the audience, to understand the kind of strategies that they're doing, even if we are veterans. Our hero's role in the story is effectively to steer the way that these problems are resolved, rather than to outright resolve them, period. In that respect, Log Horizon is very similar to the other work by its author, Mamare Tono, Maoyu Maoyusha. Both feature premises that would probably appear to be very typical and unfantastic on paper, but when you look at the execution, they're effectively dissecting, if not deconstructing, their own perspective genres in certain factions. Whereas Maoyu Maoyusha is analyzing the question whether or not killing the Demon King would actually really save the world, and how would be a much more effective way to go about it, Log Horizon analyzes the question of how does one spend one's time in an MMO when that's all one has to do, and you are actually inside of it. Both stories feature protagonists, which are very intelligent and very strategic in their nature. Shiroe, our main protagonist, will often come up with dastardly solutions to a lot of the problems, which quite frankly don't make him come off as very much of a good guy, depending on which perspective you're looking at things from. As a matter of fact, he is so diabolical, his methods have downright earned him the nickname or moniker, Haraguro Megane. This name roughly translates to villain in glasses if you look at Crunchyroll, although it's a bit more accurate to say that Haraguro is more referring to his nature of hiding his actual goals behind a somewhat sweet, or perhaps one could say harmless phrase or persona, while Megane, well, that just refers to glasses. So effectively, he is someone in glasses who is hiding his true intentions behind a veil of kindness. I find that his strategies and the things that he comes up with are actually very interesting, and quite frankly, clever if you look at it. Although at the same time, what he's going to tackle next is always the big question, because the reality of the situation is, no one knows what to tackle next. Effectively, the show lacks a concrete goal, per se, unlike shows like Sword Art Online, which have their own clear 100 floors, or Fate Zero's beat the other champions, or something along the lines of maybe a sports anime where you want to win the big tournament. Log Horizon doesn't have a strict goal, which quite frankly ends up making its pacing very slow but very deliberate. So every choice that they make always has some larger or broader meaning in the scope of things, whereby another show might make every situation, every little detail, its own independent and important situation, and or its own quick goal. With Log Horizon, it's more of an amalgamation. Everything is laid out, only to add together later. This definitely makes the show a lot slower, but I also think it makes it a lot more manageable for newcomers. So I think those of you that aren't used to the MMO lingo might be able to better understand some of the things going on, because they take the time to explain things and really let you see the significance of everything for yourself, rather than having to just infer it based on something that you see very quickly in an action scene, which is both a strength and a weakness, if you ask me, since it does make things very slow for those of us that get it, but it could probably be very useful for those of you that don't. Although at the same time, for those of us that do, we do have something to do throughout the entire show, and that's mainly to try to find out the little details, because you see, Log Horizon likes to hide a lot of subtle little details inside of its writing that, if you don't pay attention to them, can come back and hit you really hard, and you're going to go, oh, so that's what it was for. Oh, that little detail was there. And I find that that is one of the biggest draws for the show for those of us that are a bit more experienced with MMOs, It's really to see what kind of clever twists that are going to go on that we don't know of, as is compared to spending our entire time effectively as though newbies trying to figure out how do I buy a potion or where do I have to go to sleep. I mean, let me just name an example here, guys. Remember, this is spoilery. Effectively, one of the biggest things that they do in the show involves one of the smallest little details. Effectively, food in that world doesn't have taste whenever it's cooked via the menu, but that's the way most players are going about it. However, we do find that one player decides, let me try cooking the regular IRL way, and this results in food that does have taste. You would think it's just a small flavor text detail that would be a little bit more for a laugh, but then they decide to take that one simple little addition and make it explode effectively, turning it into the key component that allows Shidoe to successfully take over the entire city of Akiba and impose his own law and doctrine in order to set up a system that better allows players to work together and have a much more pleasant experience overall. All of that because they found a burger that had some taste. Amazing. The fact that any small detail can cascade into something larger and result in something grander occurring makes it so that you always have to keep on your toes and that there's never really a dull or completely boring moment inside of Log Horizon. But I find that this is both its strength and its weakness. Just as the show never has a moment that really felt totally dull, it never had a moment that I can say really hit me right in the face, or that really just made me go, what? Or, holy snap! There was no awesome dropping my jaw onto the floor moment that I could tell you for the life of me. Which is an equally big problem to having any moment that really just makes you go, blah, or just leave. There's a lot to say said about the significance and importance of contrast of tones. And while Log Horizon is very consistent and steady throughout, that steadiness gets dull in that of itself, and it really makes the show feel a lot less interesting than what it actually is. I mean, don't get me wrong, guys, there are some pretty great moments in this show. However, they just never feel as though they have the magnitude that they really should have. I mean, Shidoe, at one point, manages to turn Runderhaus Kodo, a simple player or person of the land, into an adventurer using scribe techniques. Think about that. By writing a piece of paper, you just turned someone into what is effectively a godlike situational figure inside of that context. And he effectively just passes it off as another little discovery inside of the system. I mean, perhaps others might be more interested or more surprised by these kind of things, but guys, I'm a person that likes to think outside of the box, that likes to take the third option, or that really likes to think of a trick or a solution to things that isn't as direct as other people. So the moment I saw that, I was more immediately concerned with what else could be done. I mean, within this context, effectively, Shidoe's scribe class is a lot more powerful than we're thinking about. Or if you really explored the HUD, could you perhaps find the debug menu and start hacking the game systems? Could a person of the land simply write a small piece of paper and place rewards onto that list, and all of a sudden, when the player completes this task, they're rewarded with the items on the list, irregardless of whether or not the person of the land actually has the item? Wouldn't that imply that effectively you have an infinite item cheat right there? There's a lot of different things that can be explored with right there. And quite frankly, I love meta stuff like this, so I kind of enjoyed seeing that moment and without a doubt was impressed. But at the same time, I couldn't help but think, that was cool, but if this is your best shot, you're going to have to try a lot harder in order to really get me. And that's unfortunate because it never really did again. As a result of this lack of contrast and kind of slow methodical pacing, I'd say I can only give Log Horizon 3 lit stars out of a potential 5 for the area of story. Without a doubt, this has made me a lot more excited for Season 2's upcoming story, since I'm really hoping that they're going to build upon a solid foundation of where they left off in this season. However, this season alone as it stands is good for a watch while I'm watching it, but it isn't exactly dragging me back to watch more. On to the dynamics for the characters and world. The player who we follow the most throughout the story is Shidoe, a level 90 enchanter who is a veteran of the Elder Tales MMO. He was actually a member of a small band of players known as Debauchery Tea Party, who was legendary for some of the feats they accomplished, even though they weren't a formal guild. He's accompanied most of the time by his two loyal friends, Naotsugu and Akatsuki. Naotsugu is a guardian player, who effectively acts as the tank role whenever they're in combat, and is a very positive player overall. He is also a former member of Debauchery Tea Party, and one of the few people Shidoe is capable of directly calling a good friend. Naotsugu is always positive and fun-loving, and he serves as almost a form of comedic relief most of the time, and he really does help to make things a lot more lively and brighten the mood. We also then have Akatsuki. Naotsugu had actually been away from playing Elder Tales for a while. However, he returned upon the release of the new patch, the Nosphere Pioneers, or the Novosphere Pioneers, and unfortunately got caught up into the apocalypse, per se. We also have the other player, Akatsuki. From time to time she would actually party with Shidoe inside of the game, and thus got to know him from that. Akatsuki is interesting, because she actually role-plays as a ninja throughout the entire story. She will rarely speak, and whenever she does speak, it's usually directly only to Shidoe, her master, or in order to berate Naotsugu for his perverted tendencies. She is also very ardent onto the role of being a ninja. Most of the time she will be role-playing, however, from time to time you can catch a glimpse of her real character hidden past the facade. Shidoe works well with these twos, and he himself is actually rather shy and introverted for the most part, although at the same time he isn't afraid to get his hands dirty in order to do some of the darker things, which ends up getting him a negative reputation, although those who are close to him do know a little bit better to think that, and realize that he has good intentions at heart. There are many more characters in the story that actually get a very good amount of screen time all throughout, so I can't really say that these are the only characters here, although they are the most direct ones that I want to mention. Overall, there are mainly two stratas of characters inside of the story. Adventurers, which are the former players of Elder Tales that are now trapped inside of the game, and then there are the people of the lands, formerly regular NPCs that seemingly have obtained sentience and conscience as a result of the apocalypse. What I like about the characters in this series is that they all play off of each other wonderfully, and they really do help to give Log Horizon's characters a sense of community that I just don't really get out of a lot of other shows, even with higher budgets or more time to work with, which is something I find incredible for the amount of time this show actually had to run. At times, the conversations will seem very realistic, and at other times it can appear more zealous anime. And quite frankly, I find the balance between the two helps to give the show a nice, light-hearted flavor, while at the same time still managing to get across very important points. The conversations for things such as forming the council for Akiba, and the conversations between the players and the nobles, can seem very serious and direct, whereas a conversation between Shidoe and Naotsugu and Akatsuki can result in Naotsugu getting a knee to the face for trying to bring up panties again, or his interesting philosophy that there are only two kinds of men in the world. One, those who are openly perverted, and two, those who are perverted but hide it. Effectively, open perverts and closet perverts. This ends up getting him a knee to the face from Akatsuki. There is also one extreme case of zealousness that I have to attribute to Demikas, the leader and a primary antagonist initially during an earlier arc, who is so cartoonishly bad guy that I have to wonder whether or not he himself is a role player like Akatsuki. Exaggeration aside, the conversations do flow very nicely, and they make everything kind of have a bit of a comfortable feeling. I could almost say that the conversations themselves feel like something I would expect out of an MMO, really. As I mentioned earlier, Log Horizon's characters feel as though they're a part of a community as a result of all these little interactions and little details that they get into their conversations. And I really do think that this is something a lot more shows could do to focus on and try to emphasize. The characters aren't just some amalgamation of different stereotypes or needed figures for a story. They all feel as though they're people with their own thoughts and things that they want to do at any given moment in time. And it really makes Log Horizon feel as though it's a show that has people in mind, rather than just a narrative machine meant to dish out a good story. I can also admire that every single character feels as though they have a hidden layer of depth that, for those of you that want to look into it, can get. I mean, on the surface, they all have a basic personality, but if you look deeper, you'll find that they all have some small quirks and little details that can give you a bit better of an impression of exactly what kind of people they are. But here's the weird thing, guys. It's a very good cast of characters with their own personalities and baggages and feelings and all that, but at the same time, there's no standout characters at all, really. If you were to ask me, who's the number one standout character from Log Horizon, it would probably take me a moment to really think of something, because one would assume I'd say main character Shiroe, but I'm also thinking about characters like Henrietta or Akatsuki, Naotsugu, Nyanta, Krusty from DDD. Everyone has a little bit of depth, and it just makes it feel as though, while everyone is good, no one is great. To give you an example of what I mean by great, I mean characters such as Goku from Dragon Ball Z, Kino from Kino's Journey, Sora from No Game No Life, or L from Death Note. These are very identifiable and very, well, how should I put it, landmark characters that when you see them, you remember them and you know them. While in comparison, I can't really think of anybody who's particularly noteworthy in Log Horizon. It could be because everyone is good, but no one stands out, again, that it feels as though that they aren't as good as they actually are. But at the same time, I can't help but really like these characters and think that this kind of a dynamic should be the standard in anime at the least. But at the same time, guys, I have to consider that perhaps this is a good thing, because the thing is, these characters aren't there to be larger-than-life figures. They're there in order to give us something to project onto and some frame of reference to understand the situation being played out. But it would have been nice if it felt like I had something better to grasp onto with these characters, or at least as though I could carry them with me wherever I'm going, as is compared to now, whereby I can think of them and I can like them, but I just don't really feel as though I personally cared that much about them. Thus, I find myself giving Log Horizon's character dynamics and world dynamics 3 lit stars out of a potential 5. This is probably the standard by which most anime should follow at the very least, and I'm very excited to see how these characters will develop in the second season. Now then, on to the final area, the presentation. By far, the presentation is the weakest aspect of Log Horizon. Mind you, it's not because it's bad. It's just because it is so underwhelming that I'd almost consider just straight up saying it's extremely bland. I'm giving it a neutral no star, because I can't think of it. But there's a little bit more to that. Mind you, it's not bad. Far from it. It's perfectly adequate for what the story needs. But that's all it is. Adequate. Good enough. Mediocre. Just enough. Barely passing. I never felt as though the way they presented any of the scenes in Log Horizon was as strong or as powerful as another studio could have made it in the same time period. It almost feels as though I myself could imagine I could probably have done a better job of directing that scene myself. And when I think that, that goes to show that there's a problem. Because you should never think that. You should only be thinking, oh my gosh, what awesome thing is the studio doing next? And quite frankly, it's a little disappointing to see that the studio managed to take such great material and poorly deliver on it in terms of its visual flair. From time to time, things can look nice. And from time to time, things will sound good. But I have never found a single scene whereby everything was just great. This is problematic, because it homogenizes the entire show's flavor, and it makes it hard to really take in and admire the content that they're presenting. I've been saying this quite a bit throughout the review, but quite frankly, the presentation is responsible for making the show feel more dull and drab than it actually is. It's a great show with incredible content. It just happens that it's being presented in a fashion that, quite frankly, makes it look meh or boring. I mean, Log Horizon has a more or less decent variety of backgrounds to show, but at the same time, most of the time, the background we see is effectively a old, taken down, ruined city covered in brush, which, while nice on the first inspection, kind of gets tiring to look at after a while. Admittedly though, I do have to say that the audio itself is somewhat decent in most aspects. The sound effects themselves aren't really anything to write home about, and I actually kind of feel as though they could use with a bit more strengthening. But the soundtrack itself is rather nice and really fits the mood of every single scene and helps elevate it a bit more as is compared to the rather drab visuals. I mean, one in particular example that I really liked was hearing the Elder Tales theme being played at a ball with its nice fancy instruments, and then seeing it being played by the bard Isuzu around a campfire in a very calm, relaxed mood. It really got me into the moment, and it really felt rather soothing, I'd say. So, I can see that the show could have been stronger from time to time in these kinds of scenes, but those scenes are few and far between, and it doesn't feel as though that presentation is really matching up to what I was really hoping for out of this series. Although I can say, to the presentation's benefit, it does do a good job of portraying the world in terms of just commuting the basic information that we need. I mean, Log Horizon feels much more like a game than any other anime that I've really ever seen. You can see the HUD at all times, you can see basically the strategies being discussed, DPS, tanks, the roles, you see healing, you can see techniques, you can hear players calling out their moves, learning things, leveling up. All of the terminology comes in at every given moment in time, and it makes it really feel as though I'm watching an MMO be played. I also mentioned earlier in the story portion that they do a good job of foreshadowing and adding small little details into the actual portrayal and presentation that makes it easier to understand things and helps us who have watched the show once or are rewatching it or who know a lot about MMO terminology follow things along and get a good grasp of the situation, which is a nice attention to detail that most shows could probably benefit to do. However, at the same time, I do have to call back to the fact that everything is presented in such a drab fashion that even though the details are there, they're not so interesting that I'd particularly want to notice them unless I really put in some effort. And guys, when I'm watching something, I don't want to put in effort to enjoy it. And this is thus the main problem of the presentation. The fact that I have to work to enjoy it means that I have to really try to like the show a lot more than I have to do with other shows. And that's kind of problematic because even though it does accomplish making me do so, at the same time the show's main question, what do you do when you wake up and must then live inside of an MMORPG? When the MMORPG in question is as drab and boring looking as they present it, I find it hard to really care about the answer, because I'd just be thinking, good God, I don't want to be stuck in this MMO to begin with. The final result being my enthusiasm felt as though it was being dampened at almost every turn by the somewhat mediocre visuals, while barely being lifted up by the attention to detail and decent audio. Thus, I find myself conferring to Log Horizon but one lit star out of a potential 5. A consistency that borders on blandness seems to have unfortunately mired what could have otherwise been a much more transcendent show. In conclusion, everyone, I can say without a singular doubt that Log Horizon is definitely a show that you should be watching. Let's tally up the scores for each one of the categories. For our first, The Hook, Log Horizon received 2 lit stars. For the second, The Story, it received 3 lit stars. For the character dynamics, it received 3 lit stars. And for the presentation, it received 1 lit star. If we add these up together, we receive a total of 9 lit stars. Divide that by 4, and we obtain a final score of 2.25 stars out of 5, which I must unfortunately round down to 2 lit stars out of 5. Guys, this is the mark of a show that is unquestionably worth your time, and definitely has something to offer those of you who want to watch it. I can't say that Log Horizon's first season has left a very big impact on me as is compared to other shows. However, I also can't say that it was a bad time, and I can actually say without a doubt that I don't really mind watching it again. And it's certainly going to be interesting to see what it accomplishes with the second season coming up next, being done by Studio Dean. Although, they don't really have a good or particularly good track record with me either. Although at the very least, I think they are a little bit stronger in terms of the way they deliver content. Still though, believe it or not, I'm actually considerably more hyped for Log Horizon's second season than I was for Sword Art Online's second season. Mainly because with Log Horizon, I feel as though they have something that they really are building upon, and are trying to grow even higher as compared to the first season, whereby with Sword Art Online, I kind of knew what I was getting into, and then thus knew that it wasn't going to be transcendent as I was hoping, and so far my impressions of Season 2 have more or less matched up to exactly what I was expecting out of it. Which is kind of disappointing in some respects, but also not that bad. Well then everyone, that just about does it for this review of Log Horizon. The grand final score is 2 lit stars out of 5. Definitely giving it a watch through, although buying might be a little bit more questionable. I suggest checking it out over on websites such as Crunchyroll, where it can be reviewed for free, or on Hulu, or your other local neighborhood streaming site that you like to follow. I won't really direct you towards any in particular, although my personal favorite is indeed Crunchyroll. For other recommended viewing, I suggest going to check out Maoyu Maoyusha, which was another show created by the author of Log Horizon, Mamare Tono, which has a very similar flavor and I think it can be enjoyed just as much. I mentioned it during the review, but after watching Log Horizon, I decided to go in and watch Maoyu Maoyusha as well, mainly because I felt that it had a similar flavor and can give me a good fix in order to follow up on the kind of, how should I put it, skewered or dampened flavor of Log Horizon, although Maoyu is kind of short and thus didn't really provide the big fix yet, so I'm hoping Season 2 of Log Horizon will accomplish this. Don't forget to rate, comment, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Do comment down below on your own personal thoughts on the show, although do try to avoid anything that could incite flame wars, guys, since quite frankly I think every show has its merits, and there's no need to go to war over just something as simple as an opinion. Well then everyone, thank you very much for watching this video. This has been Marcus Dahl, logging out.